How is it possible that a simple decision by the FIA, made at the last minute before the Japanese GP, has completely changed the balance of power, directly benefiting McLaren and leaving Mercedes completely exposed? Because what seemed like a minor adjustment in the energy recharge, in reality hid something much bigger. A technical advantage that had been brewing for some time and that, in Suzuka, finally came to light. What happened at the 2026 Japanese GP cannot be understood without going back a few days before, because the real story does not begin in qualifying. It begins in a meeting room with simulations on the table and a silent alarm that turned on all the lights inside the FIA. What they discovered after the Chinese Grand Prix was something they could not ignore. The cars were entering a completely artificial dynamic, where performance no longer depended only on the driver or the car, but on the extent to which you were able to sacrifice speed to recharge energy, taking to the extreme a phenomenon that was already beginning to worry everyone, the famous super clipping. On circuits like Suzuka, where the natural flow requires total commitment in fast corners, this practice completely broke the essence of driving. The pilots weren't attacking, they were managing. They weren't pushing the limit. They were lifting their foot in areas where they should never have. And that not only affected the show, but also began to generate unpredictable behavior at critical points on the circuit, something that the FIA considered directly unacceptable. For this reason, in a completely unusual decision, the reduction of the energy recharge limit from 9.0 mJ to 8.0 mJ per lap in qualifying was urgently approved. A change that, although on paper it seemed minimal, had a brutal impact on the real performance of the cars. This is where the main conflict of this story begins to build, because not all teams were going to react the same to this change. In fact, this adjustment was going to very clearly separate those who really understood the new regulation from those who were simply trying to survive it. McLaren arrived in Japan in a very particular position, not only leading the championship, but with a car that had been designed under an extremely aggressive philosophy, where practically every component had been optimized to maximize performance and efficiency in variable conditions. While other teams depended on squeezing the most out of every power cycle to stay competitive, McLaren seemed to have built a car that needed fewer tricks to be fast. And that, when the FIA cut the energy margin, became a silent but devastating advantage. Because suddenly, where there were limitations before, there was now freedom. Where others had to continue managing, they could simply run. On the other side of the competitive garage was Mercedes, a team that had been showing signs of recovery with solid results in the first races, but that still hid structural weaknesses in its behavior depending on the type of circuit. Japan was going to be the definitive test, not only because of the characteristics of the route, but because this new scenario was going to demand more than just pure speed, it was going to demand real efficiency. And this is where the tension begins to grow, because what the FIA had presented as a solution to improve the spectacle was actually about to reveal something much deeper. Not all cars were prepared for this change. Not all concepts worked under the same conditions. And what seemed like a simple technical modification was about to completely redefine the order on the grid. Because Japan was not just going to be just another race. It was going to be the moment in which it would be seen, without filters, who had really understood this new era of Formula One, and who had been left behind. And it is precisely at this point where everything explodes on the track. Because what until now was theory, simulations, and dispatch decisions, becomes a reality that is impossible to hide at the moment the cars go out to qualify in Suzuka. From the first try, something starts to catch your attention. The times do not fall as expected, the behavior of the cars is different, and above all, there is a clear feeling that some drivers can push much harder than others without paying the usual price in energy management. This is where the FIA change begins to show its true impact, because by reducing this recharging limit, the famous super clipping stops being so extreme, and that completely alters the way in which the drivers approach each sector of the lap. But the most important thing is not what changes, but who it benefits. McLaren, which had already been showing solid performance since the start of the season, takes a step forward that does not go unnoticed by anyone in the paddock. His car is not only fast, it is consistent, fluid, natural in its power delivery. There are no uncomfortable moments where the driver has to lift in critical areas. There is no loss of pace that is beginning to be seen in other teams. And this connects directly with something that they had already been working on since the design of the MCL39. A global efficiency that allows them to perform without depending so much on the extreme management of the hybrid system. In contrast, Mercedes is beginning to show cracks that until now had gone more unnoticed. The W15, which in other conditions could compete head-to-head, is beginning to show that it needs to squeeze much more out of the energy system to achieve that same level of performance. And in a scenario where the FIA has limited precisely that capacity, the effect is immediate. They lose margin, they lose consistency, and above all, they lose that feeling of control that McLaren does transmit lap after lap. The most telling thing is that this is not simply about who has more top speed or better cornering. We are seeing a much deeper difference, a difference of concept. McLaren seems to have understood where these new regulations were heading before anyone else, building a car that performs efficiently even when conditions change drastically. Meanwhile, Mercedes is left in an awkward position, dependent on a system that is now more limited than ever. And in the midst of all this, the paddock begins to react. Because what is happening is not normal. It is not a specific improvement, it is not a favorable circuit. It is a structural advantage that has become visible just when the FIA has modified the rules of the game. Eyes begin to turn towards McLaren, questions begin to arise, and the big doubt begins to take shape. To what extent is this performance simply a good interpretation of the regulations, or is there something more behind it? Because if something is clear at this point in the weekend, it is that the FIA's decision has not only changed the classification, it has uncovered a reality that could redefine the entire season. And what seemed like a technical adjustment to improve the show is beginning to become the origin of one of the biggest suspicions within the paddock. And this is where the whole story ends up coming together. Because what began as a simple technical decision by the FIA ends up becoming a revelation that completely shakes the paddock. After classification and data analysis, the FIA finds no irregularities at McLaren. There are no traps, there are no gray areas exploited illegally. What there is something much more uncomfortable for the rest. A car that is simply better prepared for this new regulation. And this conclusion is what really surprises everyone, especially Mercedes, because it dismantles any alternative narrative. It's not that McLaren has taken advantage of a void, it's that it understood before anyone else where Formula One was going. What the FIA reveals, in essence, is that the 1MJ change did not create McLaren's advantage, it only made it visible. Because by reducing the need for that extreme super clipping, it eliminated a kind of artificial compensation that kept other teams in the fight. All things being equal, the true performance came to light. And this is where the blow is especially hard for Mercedes. Because the problem is no longer one of execution or strategy or even drivers, it is one of concept. Your car needs to operate in a more aggressive energy range to be competitive, and when that range is reduced, it simply can't respond in the same way. What in other races seemed like a controllable disadvantage, in Japan becomes an obvious limitation. Meanwhile, McLaren comes out strengthened not only in results but in perception. Because now it is no longer just about winning or leading the championship. It is about having built a car that fits perfectly with the present and possibly with the immediate future of Formula One. A car that does not depend on forcing the system, but on understanding it better than anyone else. And this is the true conclusion of everything that happened in Japan. The FIA did not change the order, it simply revealed it. It removed a layer that was hiding real differences, and revealed who was one step ahead in this new hybrid era. Because in the end, the big question left by this Grand Prix is not who was faster, but who knew how to anticipate the change before it happened. And in that game, McLaren already seems to be playing in another league, while Mercedes now faces a reality much more difficult to ignore. And after everything that happened in Suzuka, the conclusion is much more forceful than anyone in the paddock expected before the weekend. Because this is no longer just about a race or even a specific decision by the FIA. What has really been revealed is a change of era within Formula One. The reduction of the energy recharge limit was not the origin of McLaren's dominance. It was the trigger that allowed it to be seen clearly. The FIA, without seeking it directly, eliminated that patch that artificially equalized the teams, and in that new, purer, more real scenario, the technical differences became evident. McLaren did not gain an advantage in Japan. McLaren already had it. It was simply hidden in a context where everyone was fighting against the same energy limitations. But as soon as that balance was adjusted, its philosophy of a more efficient, more natural car, less dependent on forcing the system emerged as the new standard to follow. And that leaves Mercedes in a very delicate position, because now it is no longer about improving small details or fine-tuning the strategy. Now the problem is deeper. It is understanding that the path they have followed may not be the correct one for this new generation of Formula One. And when that happens, the solutions are no longer quick. They require rethinking everything from the ground up. But most important of all is what this means for the rest of the season. Because if Japan has been the first circuit where these differences have been so exposed, the big question is whether this will be repeated on other tracks, or even if the gap can widen even further with the development of the cars. In the end, the FIA did not change the championship. It just turned on the light in a room where some were already prepared. and others still did not even know where they were. And now, with that truth on the table, Formula One enters a completely new phase, where it is no longer enough to be fast, but you have to understand better than anyone how this new game really works. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.